Hey, hello, it's Time Crew. This is Linsly again, as we're still in this period where Dr. Jen and I are in a couple of different spots and are having a hard time being in the same spot at the same time, but we are channeling each other whenever we are solo dialoguing. And this is a conversation that Dr. Jen and I, fortunately for me, I get to have with her often. But we're thinking about it a lot. And it's this idea that, we can live for a long time. Longevity says we can live for a long time. Health span science says we can thrive for a long time while we're living that long time. And then there's this underlying topic we talk about a little bit with AI, like, okay, well, what are we doing with that time? Like, what is it that's unique to us as humans that we're going to do with this longevity and this thrival? And all of that sort of centers around an idea that, regardless of if there was better medicine and science or AI pushing on what does it mean to be human, many of us and many generations before us hit this moment in time, if we're fortunate enough to hit it at 45 onward around what's the purpose? What's the meaning? Some of the urgent things around purpose and meaning have sort of dissipated, whether they've just run their course because that's the season of life that's transitioned. It could be early career, hard charging professional purpose. It could be family, empty nesting, or sandwich generations, caring for an older generation. So things that might have externally offered purpose without a lot of reflection or self reflection now that season is past. And so we're in a season of owning and defining our own purpose. And so this is the first of hopefully many conversations that we'll be able to have together around purpose. What is it? How to practically think about it, and why is it important to think about it and action around it. And so with that as a backdrop, we would invite you to think of purpose more as purposing, as an active verb, as an active tense of a verb. We are going to be purposing in the rest of our lives. And so this conversation around purpose is really grounded in that idea that it's iterative, it's active, it's something we engage with and something we're pulling and pushing on. And that's how we will start with this conversation right now, is around an invitation to purposing. And I'm wearing this shirt. You can't really see it that well because of the screen and the way it's set up. But this is a shirt that when I turned 50, some of my girlfriends from my early LA days, some wonderful of my soul inspirations, we all got together and we were celebrating mine and another friend's birthday, turning 50. And then, of course, the cohort of us was around 50. And this t-shirt has a quote from Goethe, which on the back of it, which says, "Nothing is worth more than this day." I wear this shirt all the time to remind us that nothing is worth more than this day. But I also wear it in the context of purposing, because sometimes we give purpose this really heavy, just like massive context. And sometimes purpose can just be, enjoying your day to day. That is the purpose today. So I would invite us to have a conversation about purpose and about the ways we can define it and explore it, but do it in a light of lightness and jovial exploration. And of course, it is a gift and a luxury to explore it, because if you have a moment to think about purpose, it means that your moments are not being absorbed by external factors that are in survival mode. So taking a pause, and because you have a luxury of a moment to think about purpose, we have a responsibility and an opportunity to deploy purpose in a way that is refueling of ourselves so that we can bring our best selves forward. So, and with that context, we'll get into it. And as always, there's always a little bit of a structure and a hit list to it, but we'll think of this kind of in terms of 6 breaks for today around the definition and the science of purpose. So first, it's like this, there's like 20 myths around purpose. And I'm not going to go through all of them that are kind of the typical ones we know, but I want to think about it more broadly together as a cultural myth around purpose, which is somewhere along the way, we decided that this idea of purpose was grandiose, and maybe it really just belonged to people who were in their 20s or 30s, and once they'd figured it out, they were going to go live this big life of purpose. But really, there's a chance to think about purpose and defining purpose in your day to day, no matter what season of life we're in. So we have, as a midlife cohort, this ability in our 50s and our 60s. We have these extraordinary decades ahead of us. And potentially we have resources that we didn't have in our 20s and 30s. It could be money, it could be time, it's definitely expertise. So we have these resources to deploy. So we have, pattern recognition that comes with being 50 and 60. We have emotional regulation, which comes with these decades. We have networks, and that network is capital that we can bring to this table. We have wisdom. We've had to work really hard, and we have this wisdom. It's internalized. It's like cellular now. And we definitely have this release from needing external approval, external permission to do things. So with that as a mindset, we can dive into purpose and think about that powerful combination around, we don't need to shrink. We can go forth and go do whatever it is that calls us, and we can do whatever tiny thing feels like the right thing in that moment in time. So purpose doesn't evaporate or disappear with age. It's something that can come on and can come on, full horses and big amplified purpose in your 60s. There are cohorts of people who have come into really exciting purpose and meaningful ways to deploy their time after the age of 60, and they're grouped around entrepreneurs and creative energies and forces and political leadership. And so whatever you're thinking through right now, if you're in a moment of transition or in a season of change and reflection, there's a roadmap for moving forward with purpose, however you define it. And fortunately, there are so many people who've gone before us that we can look to for practical examples. I think we've all kind of read Little Women series, but I always think about the fact that Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote that when she was like 64. So massive, successful book series and whole genre that she didn't even conceive of, or actually at least write of what she had conceived of until she was in her mid 60s. We'll get to a lot of those examples as we go forward. But in midlife, mistakes and things that we are exploring are just fodder for what we're getting to in the next phase. So we can kind of embrace that. And the data actually shows that we are entering these most leveraged decades. And so we can just embrace that and deploy them. If you think about the science about why purpose really matters, having a sense of purpose directly reduces your mortality risk. So we've heard about that in other conversations, but just revisit it. Having a clear sense of purpose, no matter what it is day to day, is a direct connection to reduced mortality risk. It also is a meaningful way to engage and embrace cognitive build and cognitive health. It contributes to social contribution, which lowers your depression rate and lowers your mortality rate and mortality risk because of the connective tissue of that community. And just the basics of lifelong learning, which would be part of that purpose. Build your neuroplasticity and build your cognitive load. And then again, there's so many really inspiring stories, but I kind of want to hold on to those stories and we can talk about them, especially when Dr. Jen and I are talking together to kind of go through those. But there's so many stories about people who've stepped into this power of purpose and stepped into it full throttle when they've been in their late 50s, late 60s, 70s, and even 80s, which is exciting. The one thing to kind of think about with our time window right now, this season of whatever we think of as midlife, we can frame this season as a reinvention window. So you might ask, like, who am I if I'm not out there trying to prove a certain role in a certain professional capability set? How do I think about my self-definition? Or if I'm not a parent, how do I define myself? Or, if I'm not actually in this specific linear progression in a profession, how do I define myself? And some of those questions can help you touch and tap into what is your purpose and what is your contribution. After your 50s, it tends to be something disconnected from, or maybe the better term would be released from your ego. It's more of a purpose that is connected to another sense of humanity or another community that gives you a little bit of uplift in how you're able to shape the impact and the positive impact on that community. And it can be something as tiny as a daily moment where you interact with your post office person, or it can be something as grandiose as you're changing the leadership structure of our country. It doesn't really have to be merited based on scale of impact. It has to be merited by your internal barometer, what you are giving meaning and recognition for within your activity set to land in the quadrant of purpose. So with that kind of backdrop, you can think about maybe even like we talk about, Dr. Jen and I love to say the prototyping habit. What can you think about within purpose that might be part of a 30-day experiment? Can you think about what lit me up before I was in my day-to-day job? Or, can I host an event that's around a content or an uplifting subject matter that I think might plug into and drive purpose? Or Is there a class that I want to audit that might connect me to an activity set that feels like it's part of a purpose I would see in the future? Can I volunteer? Is there a content vehicle I want to create so I can share this meaning of purpose? Is there something I want to train for? So this is more like your internal brainstorming around a 30-day period of defining what might land in the bucket of purpose and purposing as an iterative verb. It can be lightweight. It can be about a shifting focus based on the season you see in your short term look ahead and the season you might forecast in your longer term. It's like, it doesn't have to be linear, it doesn't have to be singular, and it doesn't have to be one and done. It's an active, iterative way to check in on, am I deploying my energy in a way that feels meaningful, and your definition of meaningful, not an external construct of meaningful. If you think about it with the idea of why it's worth your time, we always come back and try to revisit that with longevity. It's about powering up these next decades, and purpose is one of the things that gives you a lot of fuel to do that power up. Purpose is one of the reasons why you get excited about exploring something new or engaging in something that takes up your calendar, is thinking about purpose and that it's a meaningful use of your time. Because some of the things that made time meaningful in the past, whether that was financial requirements or family requirements, may have dissipated. And so it's an opportunity to redefine what do you bring as meaning for in your past. So we talked about how purpose helps kind of reduce mortality. Purpose also reduces Alzheimer's and dementia risk. Purpose increases healthy living. This takes advantage of kind of this emotional regulation that we have now in life. And it's also a way for us to deploy the wisdom and the resources that we've come to bear in the last kind of decades ahead, and think about, how do I put these to work in a place that feels most meaningful for me? I think also one thing to kind of give yourself permission to do when you sit with the questions of purposing is to embrace the idea that the data says the 50s and the 60s and the 70s are this clear power window for reinvention. And that data is around, the breadth and depth of science reports, and also all of the examples of people who have found a new way to create and deploy their purpose in their 50s and their 60s. But it is the reason why Dr. Jen and I get so excited about talking about how to thrive in these decades ahead, is because we fundamentally believe that this cohort of midlife women, midlife people, is the secret sauce to how to make our world better. And so make our world better is up to you to define what is your definition of better and your definition of purpose. We are hoping to give you the tools to help make that easier with, muscle and bone strength and energy and sleep and nutrition. But the underlying reason for the why of all of that work is this idea of purposing. Travel can be purposing, seeing the rest of the world, touching another environment so that we can bring our expertise to that environment. All of that can fall in that bucket. But the invitation here is for you to give explicit thought to articulating meaning and purpose, and then showing up for it. And again, it is iterative. It is not a one and done thing that you answer. Part of it will come down to something that we might think of as a little bit of an identity audit. So if you look back and think about, okay, how could I deploy purposing in a structured worksheet exercise type way? You could start with this idea of an identity audit, which is, who am I and what do I love doing, without some of the labels that I've had in the decades ahead that just were natural societal labels. It could be a parent, it could be a partner, it could be a professional label. But if you were to take that away, then who are you? And how do you think about who that person is and what that person wants to bring forth to contribute in a purposeful and meaningful way into the world? So that's part one, is this idea of an identity audit. And the second thing would be, okay, well, what do I want to think about reconfiguring? So I think the word reinvention is used a lot, but I don't know that there is a reinvention. I think everything is an invention at all the time. So it might just be reiterating, reconfiguring, communicating. What does that energy audit say about what you want to bring forth? Do you want to build something? Do you want to nurture or mentor? Do you want to eradicate something that you think doesn't need to be out there anymore? Do you want to serve a group of people? Do you want to learn? Are you in a big purposeful learning mode? And it's important. I mean, it could be, Dr. Jen and I use this example a lot, but it could be AI, like you're in your midlife and you're like, it's important that I learn this tool. That's a purpose. It has meaning for you to be able to be effective in the decades ahead? Is there a physical challenge you want to put forth? I have some time and I want to build my physical capabilities. Maybe I want to be able to fill in the blank. That can be a purpose. That we talk about the misogi, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is that the big challenge, the physical challenge that you might put forth, that can be purpose. Do I want to reconfigure how my daily processes work, my processes with my family and my processes with my communication? Do I want to simplify? That can be a way to redefine purpose. Those are things that might fall into a recalibration or recommunication bucket about yourself when you do that self-identity work that you want to put forth as purpose. And then, we always talk about 5-year plans, 10-year plans, 20-year plans. I think I have this in one of our episodes. If I don't, I will make sure to link it in this show notes, something called a dreamscape that I started doing in my 20s, which was looking at life forward. And I looked at it like in 6 months, 1 year, 5-year, 10-year, 20-year, 30-year timeframes. And then I cut it by different activities of life, like professional, family, adventure, physical, etc. And I kind of filled it out. And when I met with my husband the first time, he had a similar way of thinking about life. And we looked at it and it informed a lot of the things that we did. We work-wise did a lot of things that were kind of based on those time horizons and those activity or goal horizons. I think one of the funniest and most obvious ones was we had this thing in like the 30-year horizon when we were going to gather with our grandkids. And we were like, that probably means we need kids. We should probably figure out how to work on the kid part first. But it does help you flesh forward, what is it that you want in the arc of life? And in midlife, you've got that same horizon now. You're looking at the 30, 40, 50-year horizon. Do that exercise and think about what you would like to see in those different arenas of life that are important to you. And then that can help boil down, okay, what do I think about in my 6-month purpose or my 1-year purpose? And then to kind of give it a little bit of runway, it could be a 3-year self, which is like right now, and 3 years is kind of far enough out there that you feel like you've got some trajectory, but it's not so far out there that it feels abstract. That can be part 3 of this exercise, is to do that work on the big broader timeline with all the different categories and then really tighten up around the 2 or 3-year horizon. What do I want to see? And that helps drive your purpose in the day-to-day. And then, as always, we were talking about the minimum effective dose, or, set the bar low and clear it. In purposing, we would invite you to do the same thing. So what is the minimum viable purpose experiment? Like, what's the smallest thing you can try? Purpose doesn't mean a life overhaul. It doesn't mean you need to go all of a sudden be a Peace Corps volunteer, or, maybe it does if that seems like a lot of fun for you. Or it doesn't mean you need to all of a sudden, change the dynamics of the country that you're living in. Maybe it does if that's what's calling for you. It could be something much smaller, like, what do I do that makes my town feel happier one season a year? Or how do I think about my physical fitness in a way that gives me more energy between the hours of 6 and 8 p.m. so I can show up with the people who are in my house after work? It can be really tiny. What is your minimum viable purpose experiment? So think of it in 30 days, because that's kind of a long enough runway to get some traction, but not so long that you've lost the enthusiasm to get the traction underway. But can you define a purpose? Maybe your purpose is, I want to be more of a global citizen. I want to know more about what's happening in the world, and I want to be supportive. I want to be an uplifter in that global citizen community. So can you think about in 30 days, you're going to research 3 geographies? Can you host a dinner party with people who have expertise in other global dynamics than you? Can you write a blog or post an article or post a series around global citizenship? Can you teach a skill that you think might be helpful outside of your domain or outside of your community? Can you take a class that might be something that you want to either share in the global context or get an invitation with that skill set to participate in this global context? So thinking about things a little more from the different 360 lever arenas around whatever that purposing experiment might be, in and of itself helps kind of build your brain patterning, your neuroplasticity, and helps in giving yourself patience with the process of purposing. Purposing is important, just from an intuitive sense, it's important. But when you need the time again, and you need the calendar time permission, the science also says purposing is important for your longevity and your health span. So carving out the time to think a little bit about purpose in an active verb tense. It's something you think of for this day, and then you can connect this day with 30 days and look at an arc around an idea for that purpose over the arc of time. That would be the invitation to give a moment of pause and give yourself permission to frame all of this effort and energy that we do around Thrival with what is the light at the end of the tunnel, or the frosting on the cake, or the joie de vivre, the purpose for it all. Giving yourself the gift of the time to answer that question regularly, not as a have to regularly, but as a luxury regularly, to think through, what is my purpose today? And then embrace yourself for having that purpose and for answering to that purpose. So with that, thank you for your time with us today. And we'll do our purposing series in a little more detail and depth when Dr. Jen and I are together. Thank you so much for spending your time with us here today. If you liked what you heard and you got some tips on how to live better right now and for the long haul, please help us reach more midlife women. Please share and rate and like this show. And we can't wait to continue the dialogue with you on our next episode. Until then, thank you. It's time.